We've all heard that saying, in war, truth is the first casualty. But what happens when the storytellers themselves, the journalists, become the targets? Today, we're going to dive into what's become an unprecedented war on the press, and we'll use the conflict in Gaza to really understand a threat that honestly endangers the truth for all of us. Okay, just take a look at this number. Over 260. That's how many journalists were killed in just the first 10 weeks of the war in Gaza. It's a number that's just hard to wrap your head around. And to really understand the scale of it, you have to see this. The Committee to Protect Journalists, the CPJ, confirmed that more journalists were killed in that short time frame than they had ever recorded in any single country for an entire year. Think about that. This isn't just another sad statistic from a war zone. This is a historic, full-blown assault on the press. But numbers can start to feel a bit abstract after a while. To really get what this means, we have to focus on the people, the human beings behind these numbers. So let's talk about the story of one journalist, Hussam Shabalt. Hussam's story is it's chilling because it shows how systematic this can be. He knew he was being hunted. He was getting direct phone calls from Israeli military officials. At one point, they sent him his own GPS pin on WhatsApp, basically saying, "We see you. We know exactly where you are." He was forced to move more than 20 times, often reporting while he himself was going hungry, but he refused to stop. And then in March, only hours after he filed his last story, he was killed. So, with all this happening, how is it being covered by the media around the world? Well, this is where we start to see a really disturbing pattern, what some have called an institutional betrayal. The way these deaths are framed seems to change dramatically depending on where the journalist is from. This right here illustrates it perfectly. On the left, you've got the Wall Street Journal's Evan Gershkovich imprisoned in Russia. Look at the language, fabricated charges. It's stated as a fact. But on the right, for a Palestinian colleague, the headline leads with the military's unverified claim, Israel kills journalist it says was a Hamas militant. That one little phrase, it says, completely shifts the narrative from fact to accusation. And this isn't just about words. This isn't just semantics. This kind of framing has real, deadly consequences. It dials down the international outrage and, you could argue, creates an environment where these attacks can continue with pretty much zero accountability for those responsible. What's also fascinating in a really dark way is that the official story for why this is happening hasn't stayed the same. In fact, if you look closely, you can see a very clear and disturbing evolution in the narrative coming from the Israeli military. So, right at the beginning of the conflict, the explanation for a journalist's death was often, collateral damage, a tragic accident. A few months later, the story changed. It became, well, that person wasn't actually a journalist. They were a militant. And now? Now we seem to be in a phase of open, intentional targeting with reports of hit lists and assassinations aimed at specific individuals. And if you think that's just speculation, get this. After assassinating a veteran Lebanese journalist, the Israeli military put out a photo showing him half in his regular clothes and half in military fatigues. When Fox News asked to see the original, the IDF actually responded, "Unfortunately, there isn't really a picture of it. It was photoshopped." They just openly admitted to fabricating the evidence they're using to justify killing him. This all leads to a massive question. When a military can target journalists and then just create false evidence to back it up with what seems like total impunity, does that threat really stay contained to just one conflict? And the answer, unfortunately, is no. What we're witnessing here is the creation of a brand new, incredibly dangerous global precedent that puts every single journalist, everywhere, at risk. So why does this matter to you, no matter where you live? Because as this quote says, impunity is contagious. If one government can assassinate journalists in a conflict and face no consequences, it wears away the protections for journalists all over the world. It means other global powers lose the moral high ground to condemn other countries who will, almost certainly, follow that same playbook. And this trend of silencing the press isn't just happening in a bubble. It's actually part of a much wider crackdown on free speech that's being carried out by U.S. allies all across the Middle East. So let's take a look at the case of Ahmed al-Shabib. He's an award-winning American Kuwaiti journalist, worked at places like PBS and HBO. He was arrested in Kuwait, a U.S. ally, mind you, just for his posts on social media. One of the posts was just him sharing a video of a U.S. fighter jet crash that outlets like CNN were already reporting on. He and hundreds of others like him in the region are being locked up using these unbelievably vague catch-all charges. Things like spreading false information or misuse of a mobile phone. I mean, what does that even mean? These laws are written to be so broad that a government can use them to silence pretty much any speech online that they happen to disagree with. And that leaves us with a final, really critical question to think about. The people we rely on to be our witnesses, to document what's actually happening, and to hold power accountable are being systematically targeted, silenced, and killed. So when they're gone, who is left to tell us what's really happening?